Chicago, 2011. A cop is murdered. Police and prosecutors swear they have the trigger man. He swears he didn't do it. How far will each side go to prove they're right?
Like it's just one bombshell after another, where you're like, what?
The story of a PlayStation, a brain-eating amoeba, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Off Duty, out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
This message comes from Jackson. Taxes aren't something you can only think about once a year. With investments, planning for tax day is year-round. Fortunately, Jackson offers tax-efficient products. Visit jackson.com for more information on how our products can make your tax bill a little bit less painful. Jackson is short for Jackson Financial Incorporated, Jackson National Life Insurance Company, Lansing, Michigan, and Jackson National Life Insurance Company of New York, Purchase, New York.
Howdy, howdy, ho, and welcome to Fantasy Fan Fellas. I'm Hayden, producer of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast and your resident lover of all things Sanderson.
And I'm Steven, your bookish internet goofball, but you can call me the Smash Daddy.
And we are currently deep diving Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, Mistborn. But here's the catch. Steven here has not read Mistborn before.
That's right, hey. So each week, you'll get my unfiltered, raw reactions to every single chapter.
And along the way, we'll do character deep dives, magic explainers, and Steven will even try to guess what's next. Spoiler alert, he'll be wrong.
Newsflash, I'm never wrong. Episodes come out every Wednesday, and you can find Fantasy Fan Fellas wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to the Psych Legal Pop Podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about popular culture through the lens of an attorney and a therapist. I'm Tess Brigham. I'm the therapist.
And I'm Brooke Brigham. I'm the attorney.
So today we are covering the 4-part documentary on Apple Plus called The Super Models. And so just some general, what are your thoughts? Overall thoughts.
Overall, I really liked it. It started out a little slow. So if you want to watch this, it's very good. But
it's a little long.
It's long. It could have been shorter. And the first episode, I thought, I was like, I don't like this. But then when I got to episode 2, 3, 4, it was much better. And you really get sucked in. But, this is really our era.
It is. It is.
We are Gen Xers. And, we came of age in the 80s. And so this was, this was our thing. And it was a big part of our lives were these supermodels, the fashion magazines.
And these 4 women.
Yeah. So the 4 women are Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, Christy Turlington, and Linda Evangelista. And
I also thought it was really, really long.
Yeah.
I think they kind of beat some concepts to death that they really did not need to beat to death.
Yeah.
So I think it could have been a 2-part special and we could have gotten a lot. Plus, it skips around a lot. We see what happened in the past and then we're seeing them present day and seeing what they're doing. And it was, I understand what they were trying to do. And it obviously seemed like they followed them for a long time because in the beginning you see it seems very early COVID and everyone's masked up, and then you see them in 2022, and so
it's a long project. It's very comprehensive because it really tries to give you an idea of what is happening in the culture, in the world, and in the country at that point, and the cultural influences. And, it's a very thorough job. It's Ron Howard and who's the guy, Brian Glazer.
Yeah.
So it's very well done. It's very
I didn't know it was their, I didn't know it was their documentary, but I think what's so interesting, the first thing I wrote was just, I remember, because I have a couple moles, but I remember just seeing Cindy Crawford and some of these women, Christy Turlington, and how cool it was. Because prior to that, what we saw was this Christy Brinkley, Cheryl Tiegs, blonde, blue-eyed. Obviously, there was Brooke Shields, and she was dark-haired. But Cindy Crawford, I remember first seeing her, and it was this thing of she looked different. She had dark hair, dark eyes. She had this mole. And obviously, I mean, the woman is gorgeous. She's not like of this earth, but at the same time, she seemed far more relatable.
Yeah.
And far more of what you see. The same thing with Christy Turlington and the other women. It was like, oh, these are women that that aren't these waif-like, blonde hair, blue-eyed women. And it was very cool. I remember, first seeing all of them and thinking, how different, how neat. I mean, obviously now things are so different, but you've got to understand, back in the 80s in fashion magazines, to see someone like that show up, it was exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, they were definitely they were stars, they worked really hard.
Yeah.
They weren't just showing up. And I think it was Cindy Crawford who said in the very beginning they're close to the beginning of the documentary, that these photos they were taken, because they started out as print models.
Yes.
Okay, and everyone has to realize this is eons before the internet, even before, cable TV was just starting to become something people had in their homes. And she said, this picture isn't about me looking beautiful. This is about me selling a product. And they realized that, like, all of them very early on, that is like, I have to listen to what they want. I have to take direction from. They took it very seriously, taking directions from the photographers, and she also said that there was no post production. They could do a bit of airbrushing,
but
it's not like today where you can basically take a picture of someone and then make them unrecognizable. So they had to actually get the shot when the camera went off. That was the shot. So you had to have the right pose, the right lighting, the right angles, the right hair, the right everything. And you're selling a product. This isn't about you. And they were selling very, very high priced fashion. They were very, a very valuable commodity.
Yes. So should we just start with, because in the first episode, which is called The Look, we learn about each of their backstories. So I think that they start with Christy Turlington, and I didn't, she's settled here. She's from the Bay Area, and her dad was a pilot, and her mom was a flight attendant
from El Salvador.
Yeah, and she just was out and about at the stables at 14, and someone asked her about modeling. And they took Christy and her sister to an agent, and the poor sister, they picked Christy, and she started working, and she really enjoyed it. I mean, she said it was nice to make some money. It was nice to have some independence. And then at 15, she goes to New York to meet Eileen Ford. And it
was amazing how young
they all were.
They all were, really,
when it happened. And I guess this Arthur Elgort, he was a photographer, and she said meeting him changed everything, because he wanted Christy for an upcoming Vogue shoot, and that was a very, very big deal. And that's when she went to London and met Naomi for the first time in that shoot. And they talk a lot in the documentary about photographers, right? And how it's interesting because you forget how much power photographers have with who they, because the better the photographer, the better relationship that you have. And obviously, if you're Vogue and you want to get these high-end photographers to shoot something, they are the ones that can say, well, I'll only do it if it's Christy Turlington.
Right.
And so that's a big deal.
Yeah. And then Naomi Campbell, she was living with her mother in London. Her mother was just single mother. She never knew her father.
That woman's been looking for a father. we will.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But yeah, she was really into theater arts, and her mother actually didn't even know she was modeling. She just kind of started doing it.
Yeah.
That's all I wrote down about
Well,
her.
no, but she started off, Dawn Letts needed kids for a Bob Marley video.
Oh, right.
And that was the first thing that she did.
And then she was in a Culture Club video?
Yeah, she was in a Culture Club video. And she and her friends went to Covent Garden, and an American lady asked if she was a model and gave her the card. And it was an actual model scout. And she said, I didn't know how to model. I just used my dance training. And modeling, she said, was really looked down in her family. You know, I think her mom, that's why she didn't tell her mom.
Yeah,
I think
her
she was
mom
afraid
was like
to tell her mom.
academic or something.
Yeah, that this is what I'm doing. This is what I want to do. Yeah. And then we get to Cindy Crawford, who grew up in DeKalb, Illinois, in this very Midwestern blue-collar family. And she talked about working in the cornfields as a kid. And she said she had a very normal childhood up until she was 9. And then her brother, I didn't know this, her brother passed away from leukemia. And then he was diagnosed and then passed away a year later. And when her brother was sick, that's what the focus was of the family, you know. And she said she felt a lot of pressure to be perfect. Like there wasn't a lot of time to grieve. And then her parents divorced when she was in high school. And her dad, he really rewarded success. And that's how you got his attention. So she did very well in school. But it was before that, she got a local photographer, wanted to take pictures of her. And her father was very much against it because he thought it was something nefarious was going on. And but the hairdresser saw something in her and sent her photos to Elite. And her first big gig was a Marshall Field's bra ad. And that the kids found out and teased her, but she didn't care because she didn't have to work in the cornfields anymore.
It's like, you can laugh if you want, but I'm making
a bunch of money doing this. Yeah. And then there's Linda. Did you write anything?
God, I have so many random notes. She actually went to a modeling school, went to Japan at the age of 16 on a modeling contract.
Yeah, she was the one that was obsessed with fashion. Of all of them, she was the one that said, this is what I want to do. Like, she was the one who, because she's from Ontario, Canada, but her parents were very, very strict, originally from Italy. And so, but she was obsessed with fashion, and she would go through the magazines, and she just apparently had the look. And she went to Japan, and she talked about how they wanted to take these, when she got to Japan by herself, they wanted to take these nude photographs of her, and she kind of freaked out and left. And that sort of spoiled her on that. And then she was a Miss Teen Niagara pageant. She didn't win, but there was a scout in the audience, and that...
Well, it was John Casablanca.
Yeah, and he told her she looked like Joan Severance. And he signed her and then told her to lose 5 pounds.
Right.
And John apparently was very charming. He was the head of the Elite agency, and he dated very young women. So there are a lot of what I thought was really interesting, and we'll get into this, was just how these men who worked in these fashion houses, how they were just predators.
Yeah.
There was more than one. And the other thing that I thought was so interesting was how the designers, especially the male designers, got their feathers got ruffled when they started to see how popular these women are.
Oh, yeah, they were pissed.
They were pissed.
Because it was no longer about the fashions. It was, they'd say, they'd report it. They'd say, Cindy Crawford wearing Valentino.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, it's the other way around.
Yes.
It's like a Valentino worn by Cindy Crawford.
Yes.
And
But it was this feeling of they're getting too big for their britches, they're getting too important. It was just interesting how because the one thing about modeling, and what are the two industries where women make more than men? Modeling and porn. You know, and that's really true. And it's so interesting how in these two industries where women have more power and make more money than their male counterpart, how angry the men how angry the men around them get.
Oh, yeah.
When they start commanding a lot more. And this is later in the documentary, but I just thought it was so interesting how these men are they're such predators, and they just are awful.
They're either predators or they're just very bitchy about, I'm the designer, because you have all these people in different positions, you have the designers, the photographers, the managers, and they all have their own thing. But they all basically think that these women are working for them.
Yes.
And that they deserve to, obviously, to be paid more. And it's a very strange dynamic for the reason you just said, is because if it weren't for these women, you guys wouldn't have any money.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be selling anything. You wouldn't be making any money. Yet you treat them like
trash.
Like trash.
And there's this other part too with some of these men. You just kind of get a vibe from it where it's almost, such predatory with these young women, and they're also young when they start because they're
barely 16.
Yeah, and just how they're just thrown into these situations where it's like, okay, there you go. But then Cindy Crawford talks about how she won this contest called the Look of the Year contest in her senior year, and that's when the elite agency saw her, and so she got selected, I guess, for this contest that was in Acapulco, where she got selected in the top 10. And they asked her if she would be willing to quit school and move to New York. But she didn't want to quit school. She did really well in school. She was the co-valedictorian, and she got into Northwestern University with a scholarship for chemical engineering.
Jesus.
She is not a dummy. So the summer before college, she went to New York and started modeling for Elite. And she got booked to go to Rome, and they wanted to cut her hair. Mm-hmm. And she said no. And then the hairdresser, apparently, the hairdresser went into the other room or the night before the shoot to give her a quote unquote trim. And then they just chopped off her hair without asking her.
Oh, Jesus.
And so that's another one too, which is, they realized very quickly that, I need to start standing up for myself, or these things are going to happen. Because you can see how she says no, and then they're like, well, we'll just do it anyway. Right. Because she's not, it's almost like
she's not a person.
She's not a person. Yeah.
She's like this mannequin.
She was very shocked. She's never cut her hair short again. It was very, very, very... and then they also interview some other people, these culture writers, and there's the critic large at Washington Post, Robin Givhan. And they kind of get into this idea of the mythology surrounding models, right? Your job was to, as a model, the way she said it was almost to hide your humanity. Like, you couldn't be human. Like, as a model, you were these living hangers, and it's a silent job, right? You're supposed to make everything look effortless. And back then you didn't even know any models' names. You didn't know who they were. They were just all the same
bodies.
Yeah. And so they got into how before the models, they all had the same look and what they thought what men wanted. And the epitome of what it means to be a woman and these ideals of women at 16, 17. And I always thought that was very interesting too, because these women were not, they were different looking and they were more unusual. So that's what Linda Evangelista was saying. She was like, I never thought I was beautiful. She said, I was tall and thin and I thought I was pretty, but I didn't think I was this great beauty.
Okay, so I think when it started getting a little more interesting, for me anyway, was when they show Cindy Crawford in 1986 on Oprah. Mm-hmm. And she's with John Casablanca. She's at the Elite modeling agency. And Oprah is, Cindy Crawford looked so different. That must have been after they chopped her hair off. Because she didn't have the long flowy hair. Mm-hmm. And I guess she had already been doing something. There's a reason why she's on Oprah. Yeah. But, she's kind of like the next
hot thing.
Big thing.
Well, and I also think that this was a very old Oprah. And, Oprah was in Chicago.
Oh, that's right.
Oprah originated in Chicago before she became national.
That's where Cindy was modeling.
And Cindy was modeling and was a big time model in the Chicago area until she, pissed someone off and said, okay, I'm going to,
So she's on Oprah and Oprah's gushing over her and she's like, look at that body. And she says, stand up, stand up and show everyone. And so, this little Cindy Crawford, who's like 18 or 19 or something, stands up. And so then Cindy today is commenting on this. And she said at the time, she didn't really think much of it, but looking back, she's pretty horrified by that experience. And she said, and especially coming from Oprah, who had weight problems all her life. And it really is. It's a very cringy moment.
Yeah, it's very, very cringy. Though I have to say the way I felt even more cringy was how she didn't say a word. She was silent. And this guy talked for her the whole time.
Right.
This John Casablancas, I thought his behavior was far worse than Oprah's, right? Because I thought there's been a lot of press about this Oprah situation. This is what got picked up and in the news. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm with you. That was not great on Oprah's part. But this pig, basically, she says nothing throughout it, and he talks for her the entire time.
Well, we only saw like a 20-second snippet.
I don't know. I feel like we saw a lot of those. I don't know. I felt like I saw a lot of that.
Well,
I thought the way he was, it was just glaring how shocking it was, where she was saying nothing, not a word, and he just talked for her. I think this, she's that. Just nothing came out of her own mouth.
Yeah, well, it was 1986.
Yeah, what can you do?
So, yeah, she talked about how, she was working in Chicago and she was working for this one photographer kind of exclusively. That was her bread and butter.
Yeah.
And she wanted to go on this trip to Bali. It was going to be a modeling job in Bali. And, she'd never really been anywhere. And she just wanted to go. And the photographer said, if you go... Because she would have had to miss some things. She was
like one
booked.
day.
She was booked, and he said, "If you go, I'll never hire you ever again." And she just said, "Fuck it," and she went to Bali, and of course, he never hired her again.
Yeah.
But then that got her to move to New York.
But what was interesting is what she said is she did not want to be manipulated like that. She's like, I don't, which I thought was wow, to be able to have that forethought at that age, to be like, if this is how it's going to be with you, if you're going to control me in this way, then forget it.
Yeah. Cause she said she had watched her dad use money to control her mother growing up, and she didn't like that. And, she didn't want to be controlled that way.
Yes. So
then after that, she sort of like,
that got her to go
in Chicago, like got her to New York.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the end of the first.
That's mainly the first
episode.
one, just about how it was a big deal to get these. They were just talking about being in Vogue and how the big thing to get is a Vogue cover as a model.
Yeah. And another thing, you have to also realize, like, these fashion magazines, I can't overstate how pervasive they were.
Yes, there's so many
in our lives. You don't see a lot of magazines have kind of retreated to, you
can't even find a magazine
somewhere
now.
in the back of the store, or, a Barnes and Noble or something. But yeah, they used to be magazine racks, magazines everywhere. And it was Vogue, it was Cosmopolitan, it was,
Glamour, Mademoiselle.
Yeah.
And then new ones came out. Yeah, new ones came out like Elle and Marie Claire but there were so many magazines, and that was the thing. There was that's what young women, like, that was their entertainment. Yes.
You'd get these magazines, and then you'd go home and look at them and feel terrible about yourself.
Yes, essentially.
It's like welcome to growing up in the 80s.
So we're now to episode 2, which is called The Fame. And it was very interesting because, they talked about this is 1986. This is New York. This is Ed Koch. And
he's like, how am I doing?
Yeah. And if anyone knows anything about New York in the 80s, it was not very nice. It was rough, and it was very sketchy. And
New York City
was. But all the women talked about how it was really magical, like this grittiness. Everyone wanted to go out. Everyone wanted to dress up and go and do things. And just, that they all maintain that, hey, this was a 9-to-5 job. There was like this hustle to it. And,
Yeah. And then, Stephen Maisel was another photographer who they all ended up really liking and working with for a long time. And they go through these different men, like there's this designer, Azadine Alaya.
Yeah, that's Naomi's
father figure who took her under his wing. The guy's about 4 feet tall. And then there was this guy, this Jean-Luc Brunel, who ended up being a friend of Jeffrey Epstein's.
Oh, yes.
Who got in trouble for, having sex with teens or.
Yeah, Karen models in Paris.
Yeah, they could never, they tried to convict. Is he the one they tried to convict, but they couldn't?
Well, no, that I think. Well,
there was a different guy.
This guy, I think they got. I think it's the other guy. He married Linda Evangelista.
Oh yeah, so Linda at 22 married her agent. This guy Gerard Marie. And,
yes,
and he turned out to be extremely abusive. And she was able to get out of that relationship after 5 years.
Yeah.
And then Richard Avedon was another photographer, and he was the one who was really Cindy Crawford's, kind of help put her on the map. And this is when they bring up the whole beauty mark issue, because there was always a discussion. Well, do we try to cover it? What do we do? Do we airbrush it?
But they let it in. They left it in.
Yeah,
and they liked it. Yeah, this was also interesting too, where. This was around the time Linda Evangelista. What was so interesting about her is that she said at this time she went on a trip with, I guess, this photographer, Peter Lindbergh. And he said that he saw this very androgynous side of her. And he said to her, why don't you cut your hair? You should cut your hair. And it was so interesting because I do remember Linda Evangelista, and I remember that short hair, and that was also a big deal. Like the standard of beauty was always that you had to have long hair, long wavy hair, and then here was this woman who was so beautiful with this short hair, and I remember it would be dark. She would then go blonde, and I remember ooh, it's blonde now, and then it would go red, and all of that, and. She talks about how she cut her hair. She went to Milan to do these fashion shows. They booked her. They canceled all of her shows. But then she went to see Stephen Maisel, and 2 weeks later, she's on the Italian cover of Vogue. And that was a big deal. That's how she made it.
Yeah.
But I think that was also what was so unique and special about them at the time was that, that she was just different. It was different. Here was a woman with short hair being beautiful, and that was just not the standard.
They all had something different about them, and Naomi Campbell was one of, there had been a few, Beverly Johnson and a few Iman, black models, but not many. But Naomi Campbell was one of the first really in that generation. She was kind of like the only one, and she talks about how when she got to New York, she kind of discovered discrimination for the first time. And her mom had warned her about that.
Yeah.
But she said, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have to work harder. So that was a rude awakening.
Yeah, she couldn't get a cab. So Christy, who was her roommate at the time, would have to come out, hail the cab.
Yeah.
But she couldn't get cabs.
Yeah. So then they talk about how, these models were known as print girls. They're print models. So there were print models and there were runway models. They were two separate things. Well, so as these 4 models started getting bigger, they put them on the runway. And it was very exciting when they started doing the runway because people knew who they were, and it brought a new excitement, and they sold more clothes. And
well, and Naomi does talk about the other part too, where she wasn't getting booked as much as Christy or some of the other white models. And that before that, there was also all these limitations for black models where they had to wear bright clothes, or we could only, only one in the summer, or there can only be one, and I just thought all of that was really, really interesting. Well, just these restrictions. And the fact that she said in 1987, she did her first Vogue cover, and she wanted them to pay her what the white models were making. And, they got incensed.
Yeah, well, and they all band together. I think Christy was the first one who said, if you don't book Naomi, you're not booking me. Mm-hmm. And they really all stuck together and helped her to get what she deserved.
Yeah. And the other thing that she said was that people would book Naomi, but she wouldn't show up in the pictures. Yeah. They would book her and I guess pay her for the day just to kind of like maybe to be nice or to do what looked good. Right. But then she would realize like, oh, they're not calling me or they're not taking my photo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Christy Turlington, I think she was kind of the first model to do this. It seemed like she was a Calvin Klein model for 33 years.
Wow.
And in the beginning, she had this exclusive contract with them where, she was getting paid like $1 million plus a year. And she only had to work 100 days a year, but she was exclusive. She could only work for them. Mm-hmm. She couldn't work for anybody else. And she was the face of eternity, which was this kind of like family. And she kind of looked like the girl next door.
But in the 80s, these obsession commercials, these were made fun of a lot because they were these really sexy, like everyone's naked and a lot of like, what is obsession? Is it love? Is it death? Is it life? Is it, it was just, but it was all of this very no heavy makeup, natural look. That was the sexual Is that
one.
The sexual one?
Obsession was the sexual one where they had like the nude models and it was very sexy. And then the Eternity was a different brand. That was the more wholesome brand.
That's right. Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be about families for eternity. And so Christy is like the mom on the beach with her kids, with her blonde hair flowing. And that was her gig for a long time.
Well, and then we hear from Cindy Crawford, who in 1988 posed for Playboy, and nobody thought she should do it.
Yeah, I didn't remember that.
Yeah, I do remember her doing that. So that was a big deal. And it was interesting because she said, yes, she really wanted to do it for whatever reason.
Well, she wanted to increase her exposure. She's a very sophisticated businesswoman because she said, who reads Playboy magazine? Men. Okay. All the women in America knew who she was, but the men didn't necessarily know who she was. She did Playboy and all of a sudden she's doubled her exposure.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden all these men know who she is and they're, she just got a whole new bunch of followers.
Yeah.
And
when she took the Playboy photos, she had Herbert's. She insisted, which was very smart. Like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to pick the photographer.
She owned the images.
She owned the images, and she said, "Okay, I'll do this, but I want this photographer." And apparently, he was taking pictures of her for one other campaign and for the Playboy at the same time. And that's the part that was so interesting. She really sort of saw it as art and was like, "Okay, I'll do." It was. Same place, same everything, but where do you put it?
Yeah. And then prior to that, she got that Revlon contract, which she said, provided her with a level of security where she didn't have to worry about anymore, like where her next job was coming from or anything. So that allowed her to do this other stuff, and take more risks.
Yeah. And it was interesting because they were just talking about how these agencies and these agents that they work with, they talked a little bit about how these agencies, they act like the agencies have a lot of power, but they act like they don't have a lot of power. I think part of this is that I think these agencies, they do control a lot of what happens with these women, but I don't think that when it comes to like standing up for them, I don't think they do that.
No.
Then they play dumb. Then they're like, oh, we can't control that. Sorry. Right. That kind of thing.
Do you remember this lady, Elsa Clench?
No.
She was the style. She had some kind of style segment on CNN. But when I saw her, I was like, "Oh my God, Elsa Clench!"
I
remember her from the 80s. But so now we're getting into the cable TV, MTV,
it's the late 80s
era. Even though, MTV started. It was 82, 84.
Yeah,
either 82 or 84.
But this is when there was more and more cable television, and this is basically when MTV stopped playing only videos.
Right. They said we need more content. There's not enough videos. We can't keep playing the same,
because they would play the same videos over and over again.
The same 20 videos.
You would know that. And they did this. Do you remember every week they would do like a top 20 countdown?
Yes.
And that was always like what was happening? Yeah.
Yeah, so they started doing these kind of style and culture type shows. And it was interesting. Someone used this term that there were areas of the country that were culture starved.
Oh, yes.
So before cable television, if you're living in the middle of Ohio, or you don't know what's going on in New York City.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
You don't see people, at the clubs. You don't see the fashions. You don't see any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So MTV wanted to bring all of this culture and everything. And because Cindy, smartly, was much better known because she had all these new male fans from the Playboy, they gave her this show called House of Style. And it was funny, on one of the episodes, they show Chris Rock was on it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a very young Chris Rock. But, she just kind of went around to not just New York, but she was like in Paris, and she would just go places and go to hip places and talk to hip people and show culture, just stuff, like to show the outside world.
Yeah. So these women were becoming sort of this new idea in beauty. And so the big one was the George Michael video. So this was so George Michael, he leaves Wham, and then he has the album Faith, and he's trying to, in 1990, sort of, I assume he didn't want to be in the video because there was so much backlash with him.
Well, the album was Freedom
90. Yeah.
That was the second album.
He only wanted supermodels in the video. And I didn't know that David Fincher was the director of that video, the film director. Seven. That David Fincher?
I don't know. I've heard his name. I don't know.
I was just like, oh, that's really interesting. So, but I remember that video so well. And all of them mouth the words, and they sing all of the, they are George's mouthpiece, essentially. And I remember that, like, that was boom. It was them.
Well, that's now we're into the 90s, right? Because did it come out in 1990?
It came out in 1990, and it was at their height. Like we all knew their names now. We all knew their names. They were the big ones. And there was one other woman in it, Tatiana Tatis. She died this year.
Yeah, I looked her up. She was a German model who was kind of hanging out with them for a while. And then I guess she got out of the business, and then she passed away this year.
From breast cancer. Yeah. So now we're on to episode 3, which is The Power.
The Power.
So this is when people start to get mad.
They're like, wait a minute.
These women have too much control and too much power.
And they're making all this money, and they're so successful. And oh my God.
That's not how it be. So it was almost like everyone knew who they were. They were on the talk shows. They were on the cover of Time magazine.
Naomi Campbell
was. Yeah. And so they had all this power in the fashion industry. And suddenly fashion shows, which people didn't really go to, became events.
Right.
Because they were walking in them. And so they got to everything flipped. They got to pick the designers they were going to work with. They got to say whether or not they liked this outfit or not.
They got to command more money.
They got to command a lot more money. And the 3, Christy, Linda, and Naomi, were known as the Trinity. And so I always got the sense that those 3 were much better friends, than Cindy Crawford. It always seemed like Cindy Crawford was on the outskirts.
Well,
because she had a very different career.
She went in a different direction. Well, she married Richard Gere.
Yes.
And then I think, did she move to the West Coast?
Probably.
Maybe they were probably all still in New York. I don't know. I mean, I think they were all still, but I think, Cindy kind of went in her own direction, and she became very entrepreneurial. I remember I had that Cindy Crawford workout video.
Oh, I did too.
Not that I ever did it. Probably did it 2 times. But she started coming out. Well, she had that Pepsi commercial.
Yes, I remember the Super Bowl Pepsi commercial. Yes.
It's iconic. She had a makeup book. She just started coming out with
all these things,
all this
calendars.
Stuff. And she was now on another level of recognition because she's married to a movie star.
I forgot that she was only 22. Like they met when she was 22 and he's a lot older. And she talks about like, I just kind of, I like that too. Oh, that sounds interesting. Kind of going along with him. But I remember when she was invited to go to the Oscars with him. I can't remember. Was he nominated for Pretty Woman?
I don't know.
He might have been. And so she wore this red Versace dress, which was a big deal.
Custom made for her by Versace. Yeah.
Yes. So she absolutely, she went on a different path. But this is when they start, this I also thought was interesting too. They start talking about voguing because in 89-90 was the Madonna song Vogue. And
was it that early? Or was it later?
No, I feel like it might be that early. I can look it up. But there was this time because in New York, especially in Harlem, young Black and Hispanic, primarily gay men were doing this thing of like voguing, this kind of dance of expressing themselves. And suddenly, this is what they start talking about is like, RuPaul comes on the scene and suddenly, drag queens become more accepted. Nothing like how it is now, but he had that song Supermodel and he name checks all of the women, Linda, Naomi, and so suddenly they're becoming these cultural icons. This is where Linda talks about, so she was married to Gerard Marie.
He was the one who had all the women come forward. 65 former models came forward to say that he had sexually abused them.
Well, yeah. And so they had this terrible relationship, very abusive. And she said that he knew enough not to touch her face. Don't touch the face, the moneymaker. So she doesn't say it straight out, but it's very obvious that he was not only mentally and verbally abusive, but physically abusive. And she said she got out at 27, but she just gave him everything. She was like, I just want to get out. He kept everything.
Well, another thing that was shocking to me was how the paparazzi were allowed backstage at these fashion shows while these women are dressing and undressing and they're taking photos of them and they're like partially nude. And how is that even allowed? I just feel like there wasn't even like a sense of common decency. Like people looking out for these women.
They weren't seen that way.
They weren't seen as
They weren't at all
human.
seen like people.
Yeah.
And that was the big thing, was the fact that, so I don't know if we've gotten there yet, but Linda Evangelista makes a comment, I think probably randomly, which I remember this too, and where she says, I don't get out of bed for less than $10,000 a day.
And what is wrong with that comment?
Yeah, but at the time, I do remember people being like disgusted by it. Like, how dare she say something like that? Now, $10,000 back then is like what now? 40?
At least 3 times or 4
40,
times.
50. So that's a lot of money. And so, but that was the thing that Linda Evangelista got a really bad reputation. I remember this for being quote unquote demanding. She had a bad reputation for being quote unquote demanding all the time. And we see this, a bunch of designers saying demands. They have so many demands. All these models, they have so many demands. They're demanding a car. They're demanding the best hotels. They're demanding this. They're demanding that. And it's like, okay, hold on a second. So they're essentially asking for you to put them up somewhere nice, get me a car to get there. Like, isn't this the same thing we do for actors?
Right.
We do these for actors. We do this for politicians. We do this for so many different people. Very wealthy people have these same demands. But suddenly, because they were these models, it was seen as just, oh my Lord.
Because they're women. If a successful man had said something like that, no one would bat an eye.
Yeah.
And it's like these women, I'm sorry, they brought your fashions to the masses. Like, nobody ever came to a fashion show. It's not like you see on TV today. They'll let anyone come in. They'll let Kim Kardashian come in and, be a model.
Well,
and she's 5'2". You know what I mean? It's like back then, I mean, this was such a exclusive thing. And they were they revolutionized it. They sold these designers sold a lot more clothes because of these women.
And that's what they were saying. That's what they were trying to defend themselves.
Everybody was making money. Yes. Everybody up the chain.
It was immoral for the models to make money. But what they were trying to say is, yeah, you pay me $10,000 to model this. You're going to make $10
million.
Yes. And so it's this feeling of, well, the designers, the manufacturers, the retailers, they can all be millionaires. They can all make tons of money. But God forbid, the person that's actually selling the thing demands, you know what, pay me what you would, pay me something worthwhile.
Yeah, no, it was so ridiculous. And and all these these men acting like babies.
Oh my God. So then, we see both, I pointed out Valentino and Lagerfeld. They were the ones that were like, well, they got big heads and, these models, they needed to be reined in and in control. And it was, what was really interesting is I didn't realize this is how it all came out, but it was almost a rebellion against these women. It was almost like all these male designers got together and said, well, God damn it, these women are getting too big for themselves.
Right, they're making too much.
And then at the same time, what was happening was, in the mid-90s, it was the grunge era. And when grunge came about, it was fashion to be all dressed up like that wasn't a big deal. There was also this idea, the 80s was really known as the era of money.
It was the Trump era. Think Trump.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Trump was a big deal then.
The gold toilets.
Yes.
Literally, it was opulence. It was Dynasty. It was Falcon Crest. It was,
the movie Wall Street.
Yeah.
It was Reagan.
Reaganomics.
And it was all about
corporate
money. And
everything.
All of that came into the 90s. And so when grunge happened, suddenly it was about being, an artist and, greasy hair and
flannels.
And you weren't allowed to suddenly to be stylish and to flaunt money.
Right. Can't be ostentatious.
Yes. So, and then at the same time, the Soviet Union, when did the wall come down? That's Germany.
Well, okay. See, Reagan was in from 80 to 88. So it was...
Well, the Soviet Union was becoming...
Well, I'm thinking of the Berlin Wall.
Sorry, it was the
Soviet Union was later, like
90.
early 90s.
Yeah. So at that time, suddenly all of these Eastern European women were showing up wanting to be models. And they were hungry and they were easy.
They were cheap.
And cheap. And what they would talk about is that you could book 40 unknown models as opposed to 10, really big models for the same thing. But they all had to be apparently the same size.
Yeah, they all kind of looked the same. And that was really weird. They would go over to these Eastern European countries and the former Soviet Union and just find all these, like it was a cattle call for models so that they could come to the U.S.
And they didn't want anything to distract from the clothes. And so that whole waif look came about. So this was when the quote unquote heroin chic, remember all that?
Yeah, Kate Moss was kind of the leader of that.
Yes.
And this one lady, I don't know who it was, she was talking about how, these waifs, they weren't supposed to be pretty. She's like, Kate Moss isn't pretty. And she just started ripping her apart.
But Kate Moss, I guess, is much shorter. So suddenly it wasn't about being 5'10", 5'11",
whatever.
Yeah, you were smaller and just waif-like and childlike. And that's what I think. I think this is so interesting because this is what I found most interesting about the documentary is that I watched all this play out, but I never saw it like this. And now I see it so clearly. Like these women got too big. These men got mad. They went over to the Soviet Union.
They said, you're replaceable.
You're replaceable. So we're going to replace you. And then they find women and what they replace them from these strong women that were speaking their minds and saying, hey, don't photograph me when I'm naked without my permission. God forbid. Now we're going to pick women that look even younger and waif-like and that couldn't
less powerful,
these little broken birds almost. It was almost like, ooh, let's get them now. And it was just wow.
But I was and I really thought it was hilarious how we have the grunge era, but we also have hip hop.
Yes.
Two very different styles that have taken over the country. And the way that these designers try to interpret grunge and hip
hip
hop.
hop was hard.
Oh, it was horrible. And yeah, so you have like these designers bringing out you see these models come out on the runway with their interpretation of grunge, which is basically a pair of like corduroy overalls with a flannel shirt wrapped around the waist and, like a thermal type shirt underneath. I mean, it was all in beige colors.
Yes.
I mean, it was just like...
Well, the hip hop I thought was even worse because it was just like a lot of the same things, but with just a lot of gold chains.
Gold chains. It was like, bright colors, clothes with bright colors, and then these gold chain accessories. And it's just like, oh my God, this is
crazy.
This is awful.
So then we get into, the women they're getting a little bit older. Things are changing. Cindy Crawford is now, she was in a movie called Fair Game. Cindy Crawford, I'm sorry, but she is not a good actor, nor is she was not, I don't think she was that good on House of Style.
No,
either.
She's not a very good host. I mean, she was skating by with just, on her.
Yeah.
Her cult status.
But it was interesting too, because there are a lot of models that did start off as models and then became actors. And so it was almost this transition because in some ways it made sense for her to start acting. And I think for a lot of people, they thought this was going to be the beginning of her acting career, and it really wasn't. But anyway, and then they start talking about the 90s and what happened, which is they tried to do that fashion cafe. Do you remember that? Like,
I don't remember that at all.
Oh God, I remember it, but it was a big bomb. And then,
but I love the line they said that one of the reasons why it failed was because models are really not known as being associated with eating a lot.
Yes. Yeah, it's like you don't want to look at all these glamorous photos while you're eating a cheeseburger and fries
and a milkshake.
Yeah.
The whole thing's like 2,000 calories.
Yeah. So then suddenly what happened was Giuliani came in, he sanitized New York, things became commercialized, and fashion became a business. It became this global business, and with the internet, and suddenly we start seeing shows like Project Runway and America's Top Model. And the big thing was when Isaac Mizrahi collabed with Target. It was like, wow, the elite. So fashion, which was when I remember when you would look through the pages of Vogue and Elle, it was this thing that was so far away, like
unattainable
to women that were unattainable, clothing that was unattainable, life that was unattainable. And then suddenly here's Isaac Mizrahi with Target, and now it's attainable. Like you can actually do that. And that happened. And then also in July of 1997, Gianni Versace is killed outside of his home.
Terrible.
And they really feel like that was the end of the supermodel era.
Yeah.
Like his death and him, because
he wasn't afraid. He always wanted to lift the models up.
Yeah.
He felt, rising tide lifts all boats. That was his philosophy. And he wasn't petty.
Yeah.
Like all those other people.
Men. Yeah.
And so, now he's gone. That's the end of that. Fashion. Yeah. They said fashion just lost its specialness, because it's started becoming attainable to the masses. And now here we are where everything's just, like fast fashion. And
so now we're on to episode 4, The Legacy. And they start talking about how they're all getting older and their bodies are changing, though. I'm sorry, Naomi, Cindy, Chris, I mean, they look amazing. They're all talking about, my body's changing. I'm like, oh my God, Naomi, you still look goddamn incredible.
Yeah,
like even in a little, even in a tank top in a kitchen, you look amazing. And then we get into this Linda Evangelista stuff is so
had no
sad.
idea.
You didn't know about the cool sculpting?
I knew about the cool sculpting. I didn't know she had breast cancer.
I didn't know that either.
And then she also had some kind of genetic disorder
with her lungs.
She had to have multiple surgeries. She had for her lungs because they could collapse. And I mean, this woman has just been through hell.
Well, she talks about, so it was a big story, right? That Linda talked about in last year where she said, I'd been using tools. So I think basically, Botox here and there and probably, maybe you get a little plastic surgery, like get your boobs lifted a little, maybe. I don't know what she was doing. But apparently she was doing cool sculpting and it just became a nightmare. And apparently she has these masses and these protrusions and all these strange places. Hard fat.
It made the fat, like hard
like cement.
Yeah.
And I really, I I think that she talks about being in this deep depression and she hating herself and looking in the mirror and just hating what she sees. And you see that we do see a bit of her comeback and the way she kind of the clothes, like she puts herself in these giant coats.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want anyone to see her. And while it may seem like, why is she crying about this? She's alive. But at the same time, I mean, this was her life, her livelihood. It was her identity. If you're identified by your body and your beauty, and this happens, then my God, what do you do?
I mean, she's still incredibly beautiful.
Gorgeous still, obviously.
But obviously her body's been through hell.
Yeah.
Her body has been through hell. And, I really feel for her.
What is interesting was she talks about like my scars. I can celebrate my scars because I went through something hard, but being disfigured isn't a scar. I was like, yeah, you're right. You're right. So I didn't realize that she had, in 2018, she had breast cancer. She had a double mastectomy and then the cancer came back. And then we see her getting chemo with wow. So, and then we talked about Christy Turlington. This was very famous too. In 1996, she decides, I love the story. She quit smoking. And so she gains a few pounds. So they cut her from a show. And she's like, you know what? Forget this. And she goes back to NYU because she never went to college and studied. And I do remember very distinctly, like, Christy Turlington's in college now.
Good for her.
And then do you remember this too, Christy, talking about, I remember these commercials too, where she quit smoking and her father at 63 got lung cancer and he also smoked.
Very shortly after.
And I remember her talking, and this was a big deal because this was 1996 or 97. She did a commercial where she basically flat out said, right, like this industry glamorizes smoking. It's not glamorous.
Yeah.
You can die. My father's dead. I quit. And she really wanted to demystify. And it was 1998, 99 when they started banning smoking in bars and restaurants and all of that. So she really,
she had a big impact.
She did have an impact, but it was a big deal because no one had ever come forward before. Because what we saw in all those fashion magazines when you caught the women was they all smoked, Yeah,
to keep from eating.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then I didn't know these things too. I knew she married the director Ed Burns.
Burns. Oh, that's another one, Ed Norton.
And apparently after she delivered her first child, she hemorrhaged. And she said, I had no idea that could happen. And I had all the resources in the world and I was fine. But what about everybody else? So she creates Every Mother Counts. And she's out in the world just...
Yeah, she's done a lot of philanthropy and a lot of good work.
And so has Naomi.
Yeah.
So Naomi's out and about.
Well, she's out with Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
She's...
Well, so I didn't know that. She was an addict. And I guess this is so.
Yeah, remember when we'd see these news stories where she'd throw things at stewardesses on planes? Yeah. So she was having a little substance abuse issue.
Yeah. So we didn't talk about this, but what happened with her and John Casablancas, who I think is such a pig, is that I guess they had a disagreement. I think basically the disagreement was she wanted to be paid her fair share. And when she pushed that or asked for what she wanted, he got mad at her. So he, quote unquote, fired her and then proceeded to go to the press and badmouthed her. And she was so shocked. And she said, well, first off, you can't fire me because I don't work for you.
Yeah.
So that's not true. But what happened was that happened along the same time. And it sounds like her addiction was getting worse. And there were some incidents where she did get in trouble, like throwing a phone at an assistant, and she got kicked off a plane, I believe. There were some things, but she then became that just kind of fed into, supermodels, and she's a diva, and she's this and she's that. But now, she got clean. She went to rehab. She's, out and about, and she has a daughter. I didn't know that. And, so Cindy Crawford obviously was very smart. When her Revlon contract ended, she was like, you know what? I'm not going to re-up. I'm going to create my own beauty line.
Yeah.
And I remember, if you've ever seen it, she would do a bunch of infomercials. Yeah,
I've seen those.
In the aughts, she was doing infomercials. I believe
that Dr. Perricone.
Yeah, So she created, I don't know what's going on with that makeup line. Is it still around?
I think it's just skincare.
Oh, is it just
It's not makeup. It's skincare.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's a whole skincare line. She partnered with that guy, Dr. Perricone.
Yeah. And so she did that. And then for a long time, it was weird, but she was like I would just see her in these infomercials. It was very smart because she basically went on as herself and said, I'm getting older. Look at me. And this is what I'm doing. And the woman's so gorgeous that she's like, this is what I'm doing. She also had I didn't know she had a Cindy Crawford living. Like she had
I didn't know that either.
A furniture line.
She had a lot of things.
Yeah, she really did. And, yeah, well, and her husband, Randy Gerber, is half of Casamigos, the big tequila brand that they did with George Clooney.
Well, and prior to that, he was a restaurateur, pretty well, very successful.
I think there's lots of rumors about him being quite the womanizer. And that always made me sad to think about that like, you have Cindy Crawford.
I know.
What the fuck are you doing?
What more do you want?
Yeah. But it's just that same thing with Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Yeah, it's not about...
Beyonce's not enough for you?
No, because it's not about the woman. Yeah. It's about their ego.
Yeah, but it always kind of made me sad to think that because she's so beautiful.
Well, I hope that's not true.
Yeah.
Well, she has 2 kids who both have dabbled in modeling. And
the daughter looks just like her. It's so gorgeous.
Fitting image of her.
The son is so cute. I mean,
although he did tattoo his face.
Yeah, I don't know.
He was going through something. I think he was having a bit of a crisis. Who was it that he hooked up with? He hooked up with somebody very inappropriate that I remember, like Cindy Crawford was.
Well, is that or is that Kaya Gerber? So Kaya dated Pete Davidson, and apparently it was at a point when Pete was really struggling with his mental health issues.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
I think that was her because I remember the reports about like her parents being worried
but her son has had some issues too, hence the tattoo on the face. I mean, it's something very just, you would only do that if you were in prison for life or going through a mental health crisis.
Yes. I don't know. And then they just talk about how modeling's changed. Yeah. It's less about... Because for so long, in order to be a model, you had to be over 5'8", 5'9". You had to have an agent. And you had to be agent, and you had to be super, super skinny. You had to fit into the sample size. And so for so long, being a model meant that it was this small percentage of people that could do it. But then when Instagram came out and social media, suddenly everybody's a model. Yeah. Anybody could. And it became about your followers and who your followers are.
It's how many followers you have. And you gain followers by, look at all the Real Housewives daughters and, Kendall Kardashian. And it's because they get the followers because their parents are famous.
Yes.
And there's no... Yeah, it's kind of like anyone can become a model.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you have the right connections and whatever, anyone can become a model. And it really doesn't matter if you're good at it or what. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it wasn't... And it is, we're seeing so much more now. I mean, obviously we see so many more plus size models and the plus size models are actually plus size because it used to be in our day.
Size 10 was a plus size.
Size 10 was a plus size model in our day. So now we actually see actual, size 20, size, actual plus size models and, women in wheelchairs and, forgotten that one. What's her name? Winnie Harlow. Is that her name? Winnie, who has the skin.
Has vitiligo.
Yeah. So we're seeing so much more now and how different it is. But it's funny because when they talked about, now it's all just about followers, they were showing us like Bella Hadid and all this. And I'm thinking, well, no, because Kaya is a model because you're a model, Cindy. I mean, obviously she's gorgeous, but at the same time, all of these models that are famous now are just because they were on a TV show. Because their parents or and it's got nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, now the big thing is they let all these like celebrities and movie stars walk in fashion shows, like Kim Kardashian. But, you see other actresses and
Demi Moore was a model in
Nicole Kidman.
Yeah,
I've seen,
and that's one of the things that changed. I will say they didn't talk about this in the documentary, but what changed was when the supermodels started to that era died out. What happened was they started putting celebrities on the covers of these magazines. So for a long time, to be on the cover of Vogue, it was only models, and then suddenly they started putting actresses on the cover, and that's really what changed, because it was no longer about models. It was about the celebrity and whomever you can put on that magazine. And then, of course, they all died out. And then at the very end, it had all been leading up to this moment, I think, where they get the 4 women back together again and they do this shoot and where they all each wear what they want. I think what they felt comfortable in, like just kind of be yourself. And that's how it all ends up. I mean, Linda Evangelista makes a comeback. She walked in the Fendi show after she shared her cool sculpting tale. Someone from Fendi reached out and she walked. But again, you see her, she never takes that big giant coat off. But they talk about how, like, did you see Kim Kardashian's rushing up there to talk to her? Like, she was this big deal. Like, oh my God, she's walking. But she has a son as well. So they all have kids. And she says it's just her and her son. And and this is where, and that's, it ends.
End of an era.
It is, but
end of an era.
I didn't know all of once you lay it all out, it all makes such sense, but I just didn't see it at the time of until this documentary laid it out, which I thought was really, really good. It just needed to be a lot shorter.
Yeah. And the first part kind of jumped around a lot and I was just like, where are we going with this? But then it hit its stride and it's good. And especially if you're a Gen Xer.
Yes, it's definitely a Gen X one.
It's a lot of nostalgia.
Yes. So, anywho, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoy this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you make sure that you get this in your inbox, whatever you want to call it, in your feed. Your feed. Thank you. God, I'm old. Yes, I am a Gen Xer. I'm old. Get it in your feed. And if you haven't already, please head over to Apple and give us a 5-star rating and review. We're on social media. We need followers too. We're on social media. So we're on Psychological Pop on Instagram and TikTok.
Please follow us.
Yes. We're getting there. It's a slow grind.
There's content on there. We got to get better about
posting more
personal stuff.
Yeah.
We post a lot about
sister wives
stuff because that's just a constant flow. It's a never ending spigot of. But we got to post some more personal things.
Yes, we should. But I don't know. I hate taking pictures of myself and doing all that.
Well, it doesn't have to be pictures of ourselves. I mean, but just, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we could find something that's related to this. They
don't want to know about this right now. So let's wrap it up. We'll brainstorm this later. So yes, and I think that's it. We're continuing to cover Sister Wives. That comes out on Mondays, and we're going to be doing some documentaries, and then we'll get back to our Sister Wives Rewind watch.
Yeah, we can only do one day of them a week.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
It gets to be a lot.
A lot of
All right. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Howdy, howdy, ho, and welcome to Fantasy Fan Fellas. I'm Hayden, producer of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast and your resident lover of all things Sanderson.
And I'm Steven, your bookish internet goofball, but you can call me the Smash Daddy.
And we are currently deep diving Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, Mistborn. But here's the catch. Steven here has not read Mistborn before.
That's right, hey. So each week, you'll get my unfiltered, raw reactions to every single chapter.
And along the way, we'll do character deep dives, magic explainers, and Steven will even try to guess what's next. Spoiler alert, he'll be wrong.
Newsflash, I'm never wrong. Episodes come out every Wednesday, and you can find Fantasy Fan Fellas wherever you get your podcasts.
Pepsi Prebiotic Cola in original and cherry vanilla. That Pepsi taste you love, with no artificial sweeteners, only 30 calories, just 5 grams of sugar, and 3 grams of prebiotic fiber. that great Pepsi taste with even more to love. Pepsi Prebiotic Cola. Unbelievably Pepsi.